I was catching up with an old friend of mine recently, a veteran engineer who has spent, gosh, 30 years in aerospace.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we were looking at that footage of the fuselage panel blowing out mid-flight. You know, the clip where the night sky just rips open the side of the cabin?
I know exactly the one you mean. Chilling.
It is. And you expect a guy like him, an engineer, to be shocked or to immediately dive into the technical specs about torque ratios and metal fatigue. But he wasn't.
Really?
He was weirdly calm, almost resigned. He just stared at the screen, swirled his drink, and he muttered, "The laws of physics are the only discrimination laws you can't repeal."
Wow. It hits hard.
It really does. He didn't want to talk about the bolts at all. Instead, he started describing the culture inside his firm. He talked about how the hallways were plastered with these colorful posters about psychological safety and inclusive language, while the actual team that understood the complex hydraulics was being quietly hollowed out to meet, quota targets. He described this terrifying paradox where the safer and more comfortable the boardroom conversations became, the more dangerous the actual machines became.
A complete inversion.
Exactly. And that resignation in his voice, it really stuck with me. It shifted my whole perspective on the news. I realized we aren't just looking at random mechanical accidents or a string of bad luck. We are watching the bill come due. What looks like a loose bolt is actually a loose philosophy, a civilization that has decided it is more important to feel good than to keep the plane in the air.
That is a brutal framing, but I think it's absolutely essential for this deep dive.
Right.
Because our sources today, they really compel us to move beyond just looking at a mechanical failure and to start analyzing what we're calling the structural integrity crisis of competence.
Okay, so it's bigger than one company or one incident.
Much bigger. We are looking at a process of, well, the sources call it systemic entropy. It's this slow, self-made decay where our critical infrastructure, especially those systems that manage hazardous, complex processes, are being undermined from within.
Systemic entropy. I like that framing. It implies this sort of natural and internal decay, where energy is spent maintaining the appearance of function, not the function itself.
Precisely. So we're not asking, who made the mistake.
We're asking what made the institution susceptible to the mistake in the first place.
Exactly. We are tracing the intellectual and the structural collapse. So our mission today is really a clinical dissection of this collapse. We're connecting the dots from, say, a K-12 math classroom all the way up to the aerospace boardroom and even into government encrypted chat rooms.
That's a huge scope. So let's unpack this with a core framework. What are the key elements we need to get our heads around to understand this?
Okay, so we're dealing with a few key concepts. First, a multi-layered competence crisis, a measurable decline in the ability to actually do complex technical tasks, and it's often hidden beneath, layers of credentials.
Okay, a competence crisis.
Second, this crisis is playing out within complex systems, and especially high reliability organizations, or HROs. These are the places where failure means immediate catastrophic loss. Think nuclear power plants, global aviation.
Places with zero margin for error.
Zero. And finally, we're examining institutional capture. This is where the stated mission of an organization, whether it's safety or education or national security, gets replaced by managerial or ideological or bureaucratic goals that push technical merit aside.
That sets the stage perfectly. And it seems logical, right? If you want a competent workforce in a place like aerospace, you have to have a functioning education system that selects and trains for merit.
You have to.
But according to the sources, those intellectual foundations are decaying. So let's start right there, at the beginning of the pipeline, where this crisis in higher education became, well, absolutely inescapable around 2025.
Right. Stephen Mintz points out that the problems facing universities are no longer just PR issues. They are fundamentally structural failures. We are seeing this profound convergence of crises. You've got AI disruption, crippling financial strain, pervasive student disengagement, relentless political warfare, ideological capture, and maybe the most damning of all, crumbling economic returns for the average graduate. The old infrastructure that sustained the massive post-war university model is now just dangerously fragile.
And nothing exposed that fragility faster than what you called the AI earthquake. For decades, the standard model of assessing competence relied almost entirely on the written word, right? Essays, problem sets, take-home exams.
The whole system was built on it. And generative AI just demolished that structure in, 2 short years?
It really was that fast.
And it wasn't just about students cheating or finding a shortcut. It was about destabilizing the fundamental mechanism for verifying genuine competence. As Mintz writes, when a student submits a sophisticated essay, it is now fundamentally ambiguous whether that work reflects the student's thinking, AI-enhanced thinking, or just lightly edited AI-generated prose.
That ambiguity, it attacks the core function of the university, which is certification. It's supposed to tell the world, this person knows this stuff.
But now it can't, not reliably. And this creates that terrifying performance paradox that researchers like Thorsten Fröhlich talk about. Students are trained by the technology itself to generate eloquence that mimics genuine understanding.
So they look competent, the output is polished, professional.
Exactly. Students are learning to perform the outward forms of competence without possessing the inward knowledge you need for real-world application. Fröhlich notes that the students who use AI the most frequently often perform the worst on critical thinking assessments.
Why is that?
Because they develop a dangerous illusion of competence. They feel capable because the outputs look so good, but they lack the cognitive skills to critically evaluate that work for accuracy or relevance or even basic intellectual integrity.
That introduces a huge intellectual vacuum. If the system can't reliably measure what students know, the degree itself starts to lose its value.
Which brings us directly to the crumbling economic case for college, especially outside of those highly specialized fields.
Yeah, the data on this is pretty stark.
The structural problems become undeniable when you look at the job market data. The unemployment gap between college and high school graduates, it has narrowed dramatically over the last decade. It's now down to barely 1 percentage point.
And that's crucial because for decades, college was sold as an employment insurance policy.
It was the main selling point. And that policy is failing, particularly for the youngest group.
The 22 to 27-year-olds?
Yes. The data there is genuinely alarming. Young college graduates in that age range have recently experienced higher unemployment than high school graduates in the same cohort.
Wait, say that again? Higher unemployment.
It's a complete structural reversal of the standard post-secondary value proposition.
So the financial calculus that defined a generation, take on debt now for a career advantage later, that's fundamentally breaking down.
It is. Think about the direct economic comparison the sources offer.
Yeah.
A high school graduate who becomes an electrician at 18, debt-free, is earning $65,000 by their mid-20s. Now compare that to a new teacher earning $45,000 but carrying $60,000 in student debt. The electrician is economically far, far better positioned.
So employers are waking up to this. They're no longer just valuing any degree.
Not at all. They distinguish sharply between STEM fields engineering still acts as a clear career opener and non-STEM degrees. And the result? Nearly 50% of recent college graduates are underemployed.
Meaning they're in jobs that don't even require a bachelor's degree.
Exactly. The institution has become a credential factory whose product is experiencing severe market deflation. And this decay in value feeds directly into the root cause of the crisis in sectors that require hard, applied math.
Which brings us to the STEM gauntlet.
Yes. Daniel Sturtevant's work, which includes context from MIT research, highlights a nearly 25-year decline in U.S.-born undergraduate engineering degrees.
And that's despite engineering and computer science still offering the highest salaries and career potential among all degree types.
That's the paradox. It's a severe structural failure to produce the very talent that the economy is screaming for.
And the reason for this technical capability crisis, as you call it, is that the pipeline is structured like an unforgiving gauntlet that starts incredibly early.
That's the nature of STEM, isn't it? It's hierarchical, it's sequential. You cannot learn calculus if you don't understand algebra. Sturtevant notes that the gauntlet begins, seriously, in middle school.
8th grade algebra.
That's the key cutoff point. If you miss that step, or if your instruction is poor, the entry barriers become almost insurmountable. Students who stop studying mathematics at that level, they almost never enter the engineering profession.
So this whole crisis, it's not really an upper-level university selection problem. It's a profound K-12 foundational failure.
And it's driven primarily by a catastrophic teacher quality gap.
Okay, so let's look at that. The international comparisons alone are pretty damning.
They are. The TIMSS study showed U.S. 12th graders scoring well below the international average in math and physics. But frankly, the internal figures are what should shock the system.
Give us those figures again, because they really anchor this problem in the primary and secondary education system.
We're talking about severe qualification gaps. 67%, 2/3 of high school physics classes were taught by teachers who were unqualified.
Unqualified meaning what exactly?
Meaning they had no major or specific certification in the subject. Physical science classes. taught by unqualified teachers 63% of the time in grades 9 through 12.
That's just, how can a nation expect to win the future of complex engineering and defense technology when 2/3 of its physics instructors don't have a major in physics?
That is the central question. It's astonishing. It means the majority of students in those critical subjects are being taught by people who are essentially, winging it.
And the problem goes back even further, doesn't it? To the elementary school foundation. This is where the conceptual crisis begins.
It does. And there's one specific finding that just hammers this home. In one study, only 43% of elementary teachers could correctly simplify the fractional division problem. 1 3/4 divided by 1/2.
Wait, hold on. 43% of teachers?
Elementary school teachers, yes.
Couldn't solve a 4th or 5th grade math problem. That's staggering. This isn't some difficult abstract concept. It's foundational arithmetic.
And it gets worse. The situation is worse than just the failure rate. Only 10% of those teachers could explain the concept conceptually.
What does that mean, conceptually?
It means they couldn't give a real-world example of what dividing by a fraction actually means. They couldn't explain the principle behind why you multiply by the reciprocal.
So if the teacher can't explain why the math works, they're just teaching a ritual, not a concept.
Exactly. They're teaching students to memorize procedures rather than to understand the underlying logic. And if a teacher can't conceptualize something as basic as the division of fractions, how are they possibly going to teach geometry or explain the principles of ratio and scaling that are fundamental to all physical science?
So you create students who are instantly brittle when the subject shifts to abstract problem solving, like thermodynamics or structural analysis.
It's logically consistent to assume that a massive fraction of American students fall out of the STEM pipeline before they even turn 12. Why? Because their own elementary school teachers were themselves math-averse, and you could argue functionally illiterate in foundational arithmetic.
And the source pointed out that the teachers who struggled with math often chose elementary education because they were math-averse, which creates this deeply entrenched, self-made problem loop.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And it's structurally reinforced by economics and by sociological shifts. First, education majors have the lowest long-term salaries compared to all other degrees, so low teacher pay is an extremely plausible reason you attract a lower quality teaching pool.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, look at the history. The entry of women into higher-paying STEM industry jobs between 1975 and 1985 meant that the cohort of mathematically proficient women who might once have taught science or math were now choosing engineering, computing, and other industry roles.
So we exported the mathematically talented segment of the teaching workforce to industry, which lowered the quality of the teaching pool, which in turn reduces the number of students who are prepared to enter that very same industry decades later.
Exactly. It creates a chronic shortage that you cannot fix quickly. Sturdivant notes the long educational delay required up to 17 years to fully correct the pipeline. The problem is so deeply embedded that he explicitly states that if the U.S. fails to remain globally competitive in high tech, it will be because, and I'm quoting here, the problems we now face were entirely self-made.
Wow.
The incompetence we see downstream isn't fate or bad luck. It's the inevitable delayed consequence of structural decisions made decades ago at the K-12 level.
That brings us from the eroding educational foundation to the organizational culture that receives these, frankly, less prepared graduates. We're talking now about high reliability organizations, or HROs, the organizations that operate processes where risk management is everything.
Exactly. Nuclear power, aviation, deep sea exploration. When we see a door blowing off an airplane or a near catastrophe at a nuclear facility, we are witnessing an HRO failure.
So their survival depends entirely on a robust safety culture. How do we define that? Is it just a set of rules and checklists?
No, it's much, much deeper than that. The definition of HRO's safety culture is professional leadership attitudes that manage potentially hazardous activities, thereby assuring stakeholder trust. The core principle here is that leaders create the culture.
So culture doesn't just happen, it requires aggressive, constant intervention from the top.
Absolutely. The INPO human performance concept states it clearly. Without leadership intervention, production practices will overcome those aimed toward prevention.
Production behaviors will take precedence over prevention behaviors.
Unless there is a strong safety culture, which has to be the central focus of leadership. If you don't actively fight entropy, the system defaults to efficiency over safety, every time.
Okay, but I have to challenge that a little bit. Isn't prioritizing cost savings and productivity just good, efficient management? Why is that immediately defined as a toxic attitude instead of just necessary business prudence?
That's a critical question. And the difference lies in where the cuts are made and, crucially, how dissent is treated. When senior executives prioritize financial performance above all else, and they reward middle managers primarily for hitting production quotas, that sets the stage for what their researchers termed the cost-conscious work environment, or CCWE.
So it's not the desire for cost savings that's toxic in itself. It's the level of prioritization that pushes safety below even minimal regulatory compliance.
Correct. Safety problems, according to Ed Schein, usually mean bad management, where, I'm paraphrasing, senior executives care more about finances than safety, and middle managers care more about productivity because that is what they're rewarded for.
And in that environment, dissenting voices are seen as roadblocks to profit, not valuable inputs to safety.
Precisely. And this cost-conscious focus creates managerial behaviors that actively suppress safety critique. This leads to systemic institutional blindness.
Right. So employees who raise genuine safety concerns, they face systematic institutional resistance.
They do. Toxic managerial attitudes emerge, like the don't like it then leave attitude, where a manager basically encourages critics to just quit.
And that's often paired with the not a team player label, isn't it?
Exactly. That gets applied to anyone who insists on stricter procedures or slowing down production for checks.
That's bad enough, but the sources show this can escalate into, well, deliberate organizational warfare against the critic.
It does. These actions can escalate into formal adverse actions, what the sources call HIRD, harassment, intimidation, retaliation, and discrimination. And in the most insidious cases, managers resort to the deliberate fabrication of negatives, or FON.
Fabrication of negatives, so they're manufacturing negative performance reviews or allegations.
To damage the critic's reputation and justify their removal, yes.
We are talking about the systematic, corporate-sanctioned elimination of critics whose only crime was prioritizing physics over profit.
That's what congressional findings confirm about the industry. They describe a methodology not unlike ethic cleansing.
That's a strong term.
It is, but it's apt. This process seeks to silence voices concerned with safety and ethics by discrediting and terminating them. And when you systematically remove the people who understand the technical risks and are willing to speak up, you destroy the safety-conscious work environment.
And you can't just flip a switch to get that back.
No. Restoring trust after that level of decay, as the Millstone recovery case showed, is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
Trust isn't legislated, it's earned, it's defined by a formula. Trust equals excellence plus relationships plus integrity, all divided by time.
The core lesson here is chilling. An HRO's inability to tolerate internal dissent is a direct, measurable pathway to physical safety failure. Now, let's connect this erosion of integrity to the real world, using that detailed case study from the aerospace and defense industry.
Right. This case study focuses on one large A&D company, a high-stakes sector, and investigates the barriers they faced when trying to implement diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
Okay.
And the study, while it's focused on DEI, actually reveals these fundamental structural cultural failures that mirror that CCWE erosion framework exactly. The resistance to DEI highlights a deep-seated resistance to any change that challenges the established status quo or requires integrity over optics.
So let's look at that cultural resistance. The organization, you said, mirrored the demographics of the historically white, male-dominated industry.
Yes, those theme 6, maintaining the status quo or the good old boy club. The demographics of executive leadership were stark, 84.6% male and 84.6% white. Participants noted that this overwhelmingly homogeneous group perceived no benefit in executing DEI programs, and they actively resisted change.
So the inertia of the status quo was stronger than the organization's stated goals.
Exactly. And crucially, the company developed specific mechanisms to appear compliant while structurally preserving that status quo. This is the mimicry of progress.
Right, institutional deceit. It echoes that prioritizing of optics over integrity we just talked about with a cost-conscious focus.
It's the same pattern. One participant expressed significant anger, stating that the real numbers are being hidden. The organization manipulated diversity statistics to secure external accolades. They did this by falsely categorizing Caucasian females as representatives of diversity while actively excluding true minority populations from those counts.
So they were managing their image for external consumption without making any of the painful, profound changes necessary to foster genuine competence or inclusion.
Right. And this manipulation creates an environment that is actively hostile for anyone who challenges the old way of doing things or simply doesn't fit the mold.
Which was theme 4 in the study.
Yes, the creation of a hostile environment inhibiting optimal performance. The prevalence of microaggressions and stereotyping was rampant, We're talking about specific visceral examples from the interviews.
Like what?
Participants reported instances like being asked if they were late to work due to looting for George Floyd, or another non-white participant being stereotyped by being asked why they weren't going into medicine or engineering.
Those are clear, targeted challenges to just belonging. But the hostility also extended into the objective process of technical selection too, right?
It did. Recruiters themselves noted unconscious bias among hiring managers. When reviewing candidates, hiring managers frequently focus disproportionately on names, which often signal ethnicity, rather than focusing solely on the resume's technical qualifications and experience.
So that's a deep-seated lack of professional integrity in the hiring process itself. It's allowing personal bias to override the meritocratic demands of an HRO.
Absolutely. And the consequence of this combination of resistance, deceit, and hostility is Theme 5, roadblocks to attract, retain, and develop diverse talent. When the culture is toxic, the system actively limits the professional development and upward mobility of those who aren't part of the established group.
So the problem moves past just the initial hiring barrier, and it poisons their entire career progression.
Yes. Minority employees faced significant burnout from having to work harder just to earn promotions. The internal system actively limited their access to crucial professional development opportunities, like leadership training or key conferences necessary to hone new skills.
So when the internal system limits technical competence development for a specific group, it's starving the organization of talent and just reinforcing the status quo.
Even at the expense of necessary expertise. It's institutional amnesia in action.
So we've established that the institutions of education are decaying and high-reliability organizations are actively sacrificing integrity. Now let's zoom out. Our sources suggest this crisis is part of an even larger societal and political phenomenon, the rise of the dual state.
Right. This political model was first conceptualized by Ernst Fraenkel, observing Nazi Germany. It features two parallel structures operating at the same time. You have the normative state, which is the state we think we have. It adheres to published laws, institutional rules, transparency.
And operating alongside it, undermining it, is the prerogative state.
The prerogative state is where the ruling power bypasses legal constraints entirely to protect itself and conduct its business. In the modern American context, this isn't a visible, violent coup. It's a subtle, gradual erosion. It's what political scientists call managed democracy.
It's the violation of norms while maintaining the appearance of democratic form.
Precisely. And the sources trace this alarming shift right into modern American governance, using highly specific examples in national security.
Let's hear one.
The case of U.S. national security leaders conducting official, high-stakes, business-like, discussing upcoming military strikes on the encrypted messaging app Signal. That's a perfect example.
Because it's designed to leave no record.
Exactly. The choice to use platforms that are deliberately ephemeral, that leave no paper trail, no transcript, no institutional memory, and no public accountability. That is a direct manifestation of the prerogative state model. It's governance operating outside public purview, bypassing all the normative state's requirements for transparency.
So the danger isn't just secrecy. It's the erosion of institutional memory and accountability. If there's no record, there's no basis for future learning or correction. This sounds like that institutional amnesia at the highest levels of government.
It is. And this bypassing of norms and structure is traced directly into the educational system as well, which becomes a political front line.
So how does the dual state model infect education specifically?
We see political appointees gaining control over curriculum. We see books being banned under the guise of protecting students from divisive concepts. We see the systematic erosion of academic freedom.
And this is often justified under the banner of balance or viewpoint diversity.
Right, but the result is that ideological constraints are placed on objective intellectual inquiry. The institution, the university, the school board, it remains on paper, but its core mission of open inquiry is systematically violated. This leads directly to that managed democracy Willem described.
And this erosion of intellectual integrity feeds right back into the competence crisis, especially when we look at the psychological landscape on campus and the demand for comfort over rigor.
Mintz highlights a serious motivation crisis among students. Faculty describe a profound instrumentalism. The students see college only as a credential to acquire, not as a process of intellectual formation.
They show decreased engagement.
Terribly. Treating optional attendance, rigorous reading and hard deadlines as negotiables, constantly asking for extensions. And this is all compounded by anxiety and the low-rigor expectations that set in during the pandemic.
And this anxiety has merged with the system to create the exploding accommodations problem.
The growth is just unprecedented and, frankly, structurally unsustainable. At many universities, 25 to 30% of students now have formal accommodations.
A quarter to a third of the student body.
Yes. And this is due to the definition of disability expanding dramatically to include subjective issues like general anxiety, depression, and ADHD, and diagnostic thresholds being lowered. Mintz notes this system has begun to medicalize normal developmental struggle.
So challenges like learning executive function or time management are treated as ailments requiring institutional intervention.
Right. And the sources suggest this system is often weaponized by privilege.
What does that mean?
Well, while accommodations are crucial for genuine learning disabilities, the system is increasingly used as a tool for competitive advantage by those who can afford the necessary diagnoses. It allows students to optimize their grades and lower their cognitive workload, which just fuels that instrumentalist view of college.
This brings us back to that brutal paradox. The relentless pursuit of emotional and intellectual safety in the classroom directly correlates with the erosion of the rigor and competence you need to maintain physical safety in the real world.
That is the core philosophical thesis of this entire deep dive. Previous generations expected college to be difficult. It was a process of forging resilience, cultivating executive function, demanding self-regulation.
And now?
Now, we treat those same developmental challenges as obstacles that require the institution to change its standards. If students are trained to expect flexibility, grade optimization, and intellectual safe spaces where challenge is minimized, they are utterly ill-equipped for the demanding, meritocratic, and often unforgiving reality of a high-reliability organization.
The laws of physics do not offer extensions, nor do they care if you feel psychologically unsafe when the calculations for lift are wrong.
Correct. The cost-conscious focus in aerospace, which eliminates critics to maintain profit, and the exploding accommodations in academia, which eliminates difficulty to maintain comfort, are fundamentally two sides of the same coin.
How so?
Both are prioritizing a subjective form of comfort, financial, or emotional over fundamental, demonstrable, objective competence. The system is consuming the very resilience and rigor required to keep a complex civilization running.
Okay, so if the traditional institutional model is breaking down, if it's being captured by bureaucracy and suffering from this institutional amnesia, how do we even begin to repair it? Or at least preserve the necessary knowledge? The outlook seems pretty grim, but our sources do offer some concrete principles.
They do. For academic renewal, Mintz states that this existential crisis forces universities to ask a brutal but clarifying question. What is distinctly human and cannot be outsourced or automated? The future of genuine learning depends entirely on restoring rigor.
So we need to move beyond these easily gamed assessments that AI can just circumvent. We have to verify that the student actually has the capacity to think, not just to generate polished outputs.
Exactly. This requires designing new assessments focused on demonstrating reasoning and genuine critical evaluation. Things like a mandatory return to high stakes, time-limited oral exams, iterative projects that require continuous feedback, spontaneous discussions of sources that prove a student can handle unscripted intellectual challenge.
And Froelich, he called for a shift to training AI judgment.
Yes, the capacity to evaluate when and how to use AI effectively, not just technical proficiency. This requires extensive critical evaluation practice in developing metacognitive awareness.
That shifts the burden of proof back to the learner. But beyond assessment, what structural investments are needed to combat the disengagement we talked about?
We have to invest in what demonstrably works. Human-scaled, relationship-based, purpose-driven initiatives. This means dismantling the massive lecture halls and returning to small, faculty-led first-year seminars, maybe 15 to 20 students.
And more writing.
Many more writing-intensive courses where students draft, revise, and get specific pointed feedback on their reasoning.
And the most important relationship in that whole structure.
Mentorship. Mentorship is identified as education's beating heart. It's the most effective antidote to student disengagement. When a student feels personally known and challenged by a faculty member, their intrinsic motivation returns.
Okay, and the final principle for academic recovery. This addresses the ideological capture we discussed. If institutions are focused on ideological conformity, competence is going to suffer.
That's the necessity of intellectual diversity. The source argues that eliminating political litmus tests and hiring like mandatory diversity statements that assess political adherence rather than teaching ability and actively encouraging heterodox, challenging thought is essential.
Because monocultures produce groupthink.
And research shaped by ideology, not objective truth. Students mince notes, hunger for genuine challenge. If we want intellectual resilience, we have to welcome that challenge.
And then moving to corporate side, particularly the A&D sector, that case study on DEI barriers ironically provided a clear prescription for HRO best practices by identifying exactly what was missing.
It did. The findings for Research Question 2 offer a direct blueprint for building professional, high-integrity organizations. And the cornerstone is restoring that trust formula.
Trust, excellence, plus relationships, plus integrity time. How do organizations actively build that?
They have to focus on promoting training, support, and communication. And this isn't about just checking a compliance box. It's about empowering all employees to become technically proficient and to speak up without fear.
Right.
When employees are well-trained, encouraged, and communicated with transparently, they show a heightened degree of involvement and discretionary effort, which increases operational success. It combats those toxic management behaviors.
And mentorship, which was the beating heart of education, is just as crucial in the professional sphere to combat that structural hostility we saw.
Yes, implementation of mentorship to shape professional development is a critical strategy. Formal mentorship programs, particularly for diverse people, expose them to unique career paths and opportunities. It leaves more dedicated employees because the organization is genuinely invested in their growth.
And this also means fostering diversity in leadership and marketing.
Yes. Visual representation is a tangible indicator of institutional commitment. When junior employees see a reflection of themselves in senior leadership, it influences their feeling of belonging and their vision for their own upward mobility.
And finally, reconnecting the organization to something bigger than just the quarterly report. Mission alignment with society.
Exactly. Organizations have to align their mission with broader societal needs through genuine corporate social responsibility, not just, greenwashing. When employees believe the mission reflects the needs of society, they feel empowered and more dedicated. It provides a deep, intrinsic purpose that goes beyond simply meeting production quotas.
So this entire framework restored rigor in education, reestablishing the safety-conscious work environment in HROs, and a return to meritocracy. This is the necessary counterforce to the systemic entropy that prioritizes comfort over integrity. So what does this all mean for us, for you listening? We've traced a competence crisis from a fundamental failure in fourth grade math all the way to a culture of intentional deceit in the aerospace boardroom. And it's all exacerbated by a political environment that prizes secrecy and ideological conformity over demonstrable, objective knowledge. The systemic reality we face is that these problems are structural, they are entirely self-made, and they're rooted in a persistent, collective unwillingness to pay the necessary price of competence.
And the price of competence is rigor. It is transparent, often painful meritocracy. It is uncomfortable critique, and it is the willingness to accept that the laws of physics are non-negotiable.
Right.
When the price of maintaining the system feels too high, whether you measure that in budget cuts or bruised feelings, the system inevitably begins to dismantle itself.
So what's the brutal prediction drawn from these sources, given the institutional momentum we've observed?
Given the immense inertia built into these complex systems and those long educational delays, Sturtevant noted it takes 17 years to fix the STEM pipeline. The short-term decay is likely irreversible.
So we should expect more failures.
We should expect to see more failures across the board. More frequent, complex medical errors, more localized infrastructure blackouts, and more expensive, low-efficiency services as institutions continue to prioritize optics, comfort, and bureaucratic compliance over technical integrity.
So if we can't stop the institutional decline immediately, what is the task for the learner? For the individual who understands the stakes and refuses to participate in this general amnesia?
The task is not to waste time trying to save the current, actively failing institutions that have jettisoned their core mission. The task is to preserve knowledge, technical technique, and meritocratic standards wherever they can still be upheld.
And how do you do that?
This requires establishing or dedicating yourself to parallel structures, whether that's a focused small seminar, a disciplined professional mentorship program, or an organization that still enforces rigor to retain the essential technical and intellectual capacity our civilization relies on.
Because, at the end of the day, the laws of physics will hold their ground. The loose philosophy cannot defeat the loose bolt forever.
They always do. Civilization is not inherited, it is daily earned through competence and discipline. When the current institutional order, having violated the laws of physics and the demands of merit, inevitably collapses, the survivors will be those who still remember how to build and maintain complex systems. The question for you is, are you ready to be one of them?